Primatologists have also been interested in what we call reproductive strategies. These are behaviors or behavioral accomplices that have been favored by natural selection to increase individual reproductive success. As we were talking about earlier with allometry and how it correlates with life history features, biology has typically stratified animals into what we call R selected and K selected species. R selected species basically live fast and live hard. This relates to their pace of development. They typically have very short gestation lengths for mammals, or very short periods of development for non mammals. Um, they generally are born fairly altricial, or not altricial, sorry, precocious, meaning that they can do a lot for themselves. They grow quickly, fast pace of development. They reach maturity early. They have big reproductive output, but not over such an extended period of time. So they might be what's called simulparous, or that kind of like Charlotte and Charlotte's Web, having all of her babies in one reproductive event. And then they burn out. They senesce pretty rapidly. They end up dying at fairly young ages. In contrast, we have the K-selected species. These are typically slow-living species. They've got long periods of gestation. They've got slow paces of development. They're pretty helpless at birth. They mature reproductively later. They generally have one offspring at a time. They've got a long period of time between interbirth intervals. They nurse for a long time. They also live for a long time. And so primates as a whole have pretty slow life histories. Interestingly, humans have, across most uh, kinds of planes, some of the slowest life histories. Across some planes, our reproductive output, we have faster life histories than non-human primates do. But we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into human variation and human behavior. Female reproduction is constrained not by access to available partners, but instead because females, particularly among mammals, have to internally gestate as well as lactate. Females are constrained in their reproductive output by the resources that they have available to translate into reproduction. And so, for example, if you're food stressed, your breast milk is going to be less nutritious. That means that your babies are going to grow slower, which means you're going to have to nurse for a longer period of time in order to get your babies to adult body size. Most of primate females' adult lives, and this is true even among human populations before a modern context, is spent pregnant or lactating. And so, this impacts things like modern human reproductive health. We're not a species that evolved to cycle once a month, every month for most of our adult life. And so, one of the things that's been implicated in things like reproductive cancers, breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, etc., is the frequency with which we menstruate, and the fact that we are hormonally cycling up and down, up and down, up and down perpetually. There was a gentleman by the name of R.V. Short that actually proposed back in the 1970s that girls at about 13 should be put on oral contraception so that it mimics pregnancy and lactation, so that they wouldn't undergo as many reproductive cycles in their adult lifetime, and would thus kind of have this protective benefit. The jury's still out. There are certainly some cancers that going on oral contraception, hormonal contraception, increases the risk of, but there are some cancers that going on hormonal contraception decreases the risk of. So there's some truth to both sides of that debate. Male reproduction, by contrast, is constrained by the number of available mating partners. So males are often behaviorally more motivated to seek out mates. So the root of these differences and kind of the payoffs to an increased number of mates, they're due to something called anisogamy. Anisogamy means unequal gamete size. And all anisogamy states is that when there are two sexes, you will typically see one that is the higher investing sex. That is the one that produces the large nutritive gamete. In mammals, that's the female that produces the ovum. And in that egg is every organelle and cytoplasmic structure that is going to be necessary for further growth and development. So you get your mitochondria, for example, only from your mothers. You get your cytoplasm really only from your mothers, and most of what you gain from fathers then is nuclear DNA. So one sex will always become the higher investing sex. That leaves one sex becoming the lower investing sex. And so, of course, in mammals, this is males. And in fact, in most species, this is males, though it's not 100% true across the board. In this context, males produce copious amounts of sperm across their lifetime. There's not really a point where sperm production stops, though sperm do become more likely to harbor genetic mutations with increasing age of the father. But even someone as old as Hugh Hefner could produce sperm. Inseminating women even at extremely old ages. Because of this, because of the fact that any and every mating for males can increase their reproductive success, we see predictable effects of what we're going to, on the next slide, call sexual selection. That the sex that is lower investing is going to experience greater variance in reproductive success. Some males have it, some males don't. When females are picking males based on certain qualities, some females may pick the same male depending on what those qualities are that we're looking for. So that leads to pretty intense male-male competition over access to mates. And that's what selection is favoring, what sexual selection is favoring in this context is not really survival per se, but rather reproductive success. Put them all out again. Evie, go out. Moshe, go out. Get Moshe and Cardi out. Moshe, come on. Moshe. 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 Let's go outside. And so sexual selection is a type of natural selection that typically occurs on only one sex or operates on only one sex. It is generally more strongly pronounced among males than females because of the fact that males produce smaller gametes. There are some interesting what we call sex role reverse species where even though females produce eggs and males produce sperm, because of the nature of parental investment, then females are selected to exhibit these elaborated or exaggerated traits. Seahorses are one species where males carry the eggs until they hatch in a pouch. Crickets see sex role reversal. Some shorebirds, like sandpipers and jacanas, see sex role reversal. So there are, of course, exceptions that really prove the rule when something else is impacting kind of that cost and benefit of parental investment. The selective agent here is either male-male competition or mate choice by females or both. In some cases, it's contest competition whereby the male that wins gets all the mates. This is what we see, for example, among livestock, among many grazing animals, stallions and mares, for example. This is what we see among many of our ungulates like deer and moose and elk, that it's this contest competition and winner takes all. We even see this among some marine mammals, elephant seals, for example. It's contest competition. But we also see some situations where even if there's male-male competition, that is then followed by female choice. And so we see lekking behavior among prairie birds, for example, like the prairie chicken and the sage grouse and such, where these male birds come together onto a stage, basically a slight rise in the grasslands, and then just create a ruckus, just basically create this cacophony of noise through their vocalizations that all it's really doing is saying, hey, look at me, I'm so wonderful, you want to mate with me, I'm so sexy, so on and so forth. Kind of like a song, I'm sexy and I know it, or something like that. Those kinds of displays, they're competing with other males, but by being the loudest, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the male that's chosen by females. So there is that element of competition, but it's not a winner takes all battle. And females may pick males across different dimensions, per se. The long term effect of sexual selection is an increase in the frequency of traits that lead to greater success in acquiring mates. In some cases, sexually selected traits can be at odds with survival. Think about peacocks, for example. Peacocks are one textbook example of a sexually selected species. Males have those elaborate tails. There's a survival risk associated with those elaborate tails. Peacocks live in habitats that are shared by tigers. Those tails require a phenomenal amount of lift before you're able to take off and fly with them. So you have to run a great distance, kind of like roadrunners also have to do, to be able to fly. So in a context where a tiger is pursuing you, predating upon you, if you can't generate enough lift fast enough, you're going to be picked off. So those tails are associated with a survival cost. So why then do males have them? Well, because those tails are associated with a reproductive benefit. Female choice kind of maps on to the brightness of the colors as a signal maybe of underlying testosterone, and also the size and the number of eyes that are present on the tail. So being able to bear the fitness cost, the survival cost of that large tail and still present a beautifully large tail is an indicator perhaps of underlying genetic quality for peacocks. We see this same sort of relationship among mammals. Males are generally larger and heavier. That's what we see with this top picture here of orangutans. This is a male Bornean orangutan. This is a female Bornean orangutan. Males are 2 to 3 times as large as females. And in fact, among orangutans, males are indeterminate growers, meaning they don't ever stop growing. So provided they live long enough and find enough food to support that large body size, they can grow for a really long time, as long as they live. Males also develop a suite of what we call secondary sexual characteristics, including these cheek phalanges and including this throat sac, which is comprised predominantly of fat, but that throat sac does inflate when males make their long call, and it helps make their call travel farther, up to 20 kilometers or so. Males are generally more brightly colored. That's what we see here with this male mandrill. Mandrills have coloration on their face that is related to their underlying testosterone levels. So the colors of their face are really reliable visual indicators of what's going on hormonally. The brighter the colors, the higher the level of testosterone. The higher the level of testosterone without dying from it. Testosterone is a hormone that is associated with a greater risk of death at all age groups, at all age classes. So bearing a higher level of testosterone and not dying is an indicator of potentially underlying genetic qualities. So mandrill females choose males that display these really bright colors. Males that have low testosterone, their colors are like, something that's been treated with bleach. They basically get washed out and kind of drab. These colors on their faces are also mimicked by the colors of their scrotum and their penis. The penis mimics that bright red of the nose itself, and the scrotum is going to be that blue shade that you see surrounding the nose. So females are also looking for correlation between the colors of the face and the colors of the genitalia. Males may be more heavily armored. That is what's going on here with this savanna baboon. What do you notice in that open mouth threat? You notice the canine length. Male savanna baboons have incredibly large canines, much larger than would be expected by the slight differences that we see in body size. Well, it's not always slight. Sometimes males are about twice as large as females. But that canine size is associated with fighting. And so males are much more likely to engage in what we call contest competition. They have to fight their way into the troop. Females, though they may sometimes fight, their fights are generally mitigated through these other signals. So female fights aren't nearly as lethal. They don't last for as long. They're not necessary for entering into a group, having access to food or mates. And so females, therefore, don't have canines that are so pronounced. There are species certainly where females also have pronounced canines. I mean, we can think about lions, right? Well, what are the canines being used for in that context? It's for active hunting. So when canines are being used as tools to gain resources, both males and females are going to have elaborated canines. When they're used just for fighting in only one sex, we're going to see sexual selection on those traits. Gibbons and Siamese, both males and females, have pronounced canines. That is because both males and females engage in contest competition. Gibbons live in monogamous social groups, and females have constant battles in maintaining their rank as the breeding female, where males battle with other males to maintain their rank as the breeding male. So, because females are competing with females and males are competing with males, we see the elaboration of canines among both sexes. And then males are also, they are more likely to exhibit traits that they display to attract females. And so, presumably, that we don't exactly know, this is what's going on with proboscis monkeys. With proboscis monkeys, there is a relationship between the size of their nose and the size of their penis, and they often walk around displaying erect penises and will even engage in behaviors like penis fencing, where males basically sword fight with their penises. And proboscis monkeys are not the only species that penis fence. Squirrel monkeys do it too. It also helps to cement male relationships and alliances when they rub their penises up against one another. So similar to bonobos with same-sex female genital rubbing, so too do some monkeys engage in same-sex genital rubbing. And it can be a display. It can also be something to bond males tightly together to affiliate. So, with all of these things in mind, the fact that external variables like predation pressures, like diet can drive group size, but also group-specific variables like or species-specific variables like body size, like basal metabolic rate, can affect group size. Now we're going to talk actually about what primate groups look like. We're going to talk about this basic kind of level of social organization. The most basic unit of social organization among primates is a mother and her offspring. That is ubiquitous. That is what we find across all species. We don't find female primates abandoning their offspring to be raised by males, for example. In fact, among primates, we don't find very much male care at all. Even among the relatively monogamous species like gibbons and siamese, females are still doing the preponderance of the actual child rearing or offspring rearing. There are some exceptions. Marmosets and tamarins, for example, almost always have twins, and those babies are born at about 50% of maternal body weight. Bearing infants that weigh so much relative to you means that you're not going to be able to bear the energetic burden of both lactating for them, but also just carrying them. And so among marmosets and tamarins, we find male parental investment. We find paternal investment in the form of carrying infants for the mother. And so those infants are actually most likely to be carried by an older sibling or a father or an unrelated male relative to being carried actually by their mothers. We also find outliers. And so I'm not sure if I've mentioned this as an opportunity for extra credit, but there's a Disney nature film that came out several years ago called Chimpanzees that you may watch for extra credit. Disney got the perfect Disney story in their 2 years of filming this population, one of Christophe Bosch's populations of chimpanzees. In that, the mother is killed. The infant is about 3.5, which is younger than the age of weaning, however, old enough to be able to eat quite a variety of solid foods, but not old enough to be able to provide all of its caloric needs. And the baby goes around, Oscar's his name, goes around basically soliciting to every female in the group to be adopted, and everybody rebuffs him. It ends up being the adult male, the alpha male, who adopts Oscar. Interestingly enough, He is also the most likely male to be the biological father of Oscar. So it's just the irony that among chimps, the least likely candidate to adopt you is your biological father. Just demonstrating that we don't see much paternal care among chimps. In this film, though, there's a cost to Oscar being adopted by the adult male, and that is that adult male can't kind of keep up with his territorial patrols, and there ends up being a brutal attack launched by the neighboring group to try to get the nut groves that belongs to this troop of chimps. In true Disney fashion, good prevails over evil, though we'd be reticent to name troops of primates good and evil. And the male is able to fight off the marauding outsiders, and Oscar is able to presumably grow up happy and healthy in his social group. Now, um, what you would do for extra credit for that movie is obviously watch it, and then submit via course messages a 500-word essay, two-thirds of which summarizes the movie, one-third of which includes your personal reflections. So, what did you think of the movie? How did it touch you? Has it changed how you think about chimpanzees? Or did it kind of counter, like, do you think of chimpanzees as being more compassionate, or did it counter what you knew about chimpanzees as being aggressive and not really providing much paternal care, so on and so forth? So again, 500-word essay, two-thirds summary, one-third personal reflections. Just submit that through the course messages for 5 points of extra credit that can be applied wherever you might have an assignment missing. Um, all right, so we've got some non-human primates that are what we call monogamous, that is one male, one female. This is true among gibbons and siamangs. Titi monkeys in South America, Indris, tarsiers, pottos, across Madagascar, and then other areas of Africa for the tarsiers, and some humans. Why do we say some humans? Well, 80% of human societies allow for some degree of polygyny. That doesn't mean that 80% of men on the planet are married polygynously. It's just talking about kind of what's socially acceptable. And more societies allow polygyny than culturally imposed sanctions upon polygyny. So by and large, the dominant kind of cultural institution of marriage is one of polygyny, that males may have multiple wives. We also see then, of course, polygyny. This is one female with, or one male with several females. This is what we consider the harems of gorillas, for example. Though recent research has shown that oftentimes there may be two or three males that share the protection of that group of females and mate with different females in the group. Langurs are one male, multiple female, and we'll talk about how this is manifest in infanticide when there's a new male takeover in just a minute. We also find it among Hamadryas baboons, gelada baboons, howler monkeys, and obviously some humans, as we just talked about. There is polyandry found in rare primate examples. This includes the marmosets and tamarins and a few human populations. Polyandry only occurs in about 1% of all human populations. This is a situation where women are able to marry multiple husbands, and it is an adaptation to really high male mobility. So in the foothills of the Himalayas, Nepal, Tibet, etc., there's a lot of male migration because it's hard to farm the land in the foothills of the Himalayas. And so males often travel to the city then for paid employment. When there's high male migration, women may marry a group of males in the hopes that that increases the likelihood that on any given day there will be males present on the farmhold to do male labor. We also find in these same areas what we call fraternal polyandry, which means that a woman will marry an entire group of brothers. And what this does is prevents us from subdividing landholdings into patches that would be too small to be able to support anybody. And so by marrying a group of brothers and having sex with all of them, they communally raise all of those offspring. You don't end up with as many offspring competing for that inheritance as you would if each brother was able to have his own wife or have his own family. So you're restricting reproduction in a context where you can't really have very much inheritance, where you've got small land holdings that can't be broken up any further. We also have a system that is sometimes, particularly among humans, and actually among other mammals, but not usually primates, called polygynandry, which just means multiple males, multiple females. This social structure is very widespread among primates, but it's just not called polygynandry among primates. And we see this among savanna baboons, macaques, the cercopithecines, also the colobines, the colobus monkeys, spider monkeys, capuchin monkeys, and chimpanzees. So you'll have multiple males and multiple females present in the society, with varying degrees of like how strict that group size is maintained. So you might see like what we see with chimpanzees and spider monkeys and capuchins, where we've got fission fusion organization. So the day-to-day organization may be just one or two males with four or five females, but the larger group that comes together is going to be definitely multi-male, multi-female. And the size of kind of those coalesced groups is going to be determined by prevalent resources, or kind of what's going on ecologically. And so this fission fusion can be associated with um, polygyny, it can be associated with polyandry, it can be associated with kind of this variable group size, which really is characteristic of modern human foragers, even historical and evolutionary time human foragers. That foragers, the day-to-day foraging band may only be five or six nuclear families. Note that we're combining monogamy with fission fusion social organization. But over the long term, you may change your band membership, and those bands will periodically come together in larger groups of upwards of 5 to 800 individuals. So this tendency towards, let's say, flexible group size carries across hominins, and very likely was characteristic of early human groups as well as fully modern human groups. So we talked about how, with respect to langurs that have this one male, multi-female group, that we see high rates of infanticide. And this was one of those factors that influenced group size, was this need to minimize the likelihood of infanticide. So one strategy that can be employed by males is infanticide, particularly when we see those polygynous groupings. And so infanticide is when males will actively seek out and kill infants. Hanuman langurs are a really good example of this, also called the gray langur. They live in groups that are comprised of a single adult male and his harem of females. And those males are constantly being challenged for their harem. So if a new male takes over, he will go ahead and kill any infants that are still nursing. Langurs will nurse for 2 to 3 years. So by killing nursing infants, you are basically bringing their mothers back into estrus, because nursing is associated with what we call lactational amenorrhea. And so while mothers are nursing, they're less likely to resume cycling. So by killing nursing infants, mothers start cycling sooner. He will also kill any infants that are born within the next 6 months, because that's about the length of gestation for Hanuman langurs. So he's not killing infants that are likely to be his. He's killing infants that are likely to be sired by another male. He's raising the likelihood then that any infants that are going to be in his group are going to be sired by him. It's a way of reducing your competition, basically, and ensuring your own reproductive success. Infanticide at the hand of males is also present in chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans. In fact, if we look at human rates of both infanticide as well as child abuse, neglect, and homicide, it is most likely to occur at the hands of a stepfather, and is often viewed as a behavioral tactic in order to increase the likelihood that male will mate with the mother and have offspring that are sired by him. So I know we don't like to talk about some of these disturbing behaviors as being human behaviors as well, but infanticide, child abuse, child homicide, neglect are certainly behaviors that are widespread across human populations. Now, when we see infanticide at the hands of mothers, it is usually because there's some indication that that offspring is not going to be able to translate investment into future reproductive success. And so we see this among human populations when we've got sex-biased infanticide. For example, in China, there was a long history of one-child policy coupled with female-biased infanticide and abortion that has led to a dramatic skew in the sex ratio that is affecting male reproductive success now that there aren't many females for males to mate with. And so China is having to culturally relax their one-child policy and also promote not aborting female fetuses, kind of minimizing the stigma of having daughters because there are so few women available now for this huge population of males to mate with. In fact, when we were in China in 2008, our tour guide said that in Beijing alone, there were over 200,000 adult males who would never have a willing sex partner. And one of the ways that the government was dealing with that was by legalizing prostitution for Chinese citizens, but still punishing visiting brothels very heavily among foreigners. And now, of course, the likely women providing sex in that kind of brothel situation were undocumented women from the countryside. So this wasn't necessarily good for women, that there were cultural mechanisms to help cope with the lack of females. It still wasn't associated across the board with higher female status. So the other thing can be profound birth defects. In hunter-gatherer populations, if a child's born without a limb, for example, they're likely to be killed by the group. If they're born blind or deaf, they're likely to be killed by the group because those kinds of disabilities in food-limited primary subsistence economies are associated with an extreme resource drain on the parents, and that is something that can make all of your offspring suffer from. Now, in a modern context with modern medical intervention, right, we don't condone infanticide of disabled offspring, and we are very active proponents of seeing alternate abilities